So what do you do when somebody is trying to have a relationship with you? You're identifying toxic patterns that they're not willing or able to change, but you still have a really strong desire to maintain a relationship. Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider. Welcome back to Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. I'm your host, Sarah Westbrook, joined today by Mason Westbrook, whose brother is at it again.
I'm here too.
Yay, you.
A little anxious again, just these kind of things. I mentioned to you right before we got started that the concept of brother number one is at it again is a little triggering for me, mostly because I do not want to be doing character attacks. It feels a little bit like that. But I just want that to, I just want that. I want to be able to talk about these things in a way that helps us all. And so while my intent is not to attack my brother or anybody else, I know sometimes it's going to come off that way, but I want more to be able to see the unhealthiness of these kind of conversations in the hopes that it will help me to do better and will help others, some of our listeners, to do better in these. Because ultimately we want strong relationships.
So yeah, I know you well enough to know, Mason, that that's not your intention. And so I really appreciate the fact that you can say that. And so I just want to make sure that we set our intention very clearly here in the beginning. And that is that we're not here to do character attacks, but you're not alone. You're not the only one in this ex-Mormon or ex-religious space where you're being treated kind of shitty. And in some ways, it's like in the name of truth and righteousness or in the name of God, which kind of adds this extra level of ickiness to it. And so our goal today is going to be to better understand what radical acceptance is. We're going to talk a lot today about radical acceptance. We're going to define it more clearly, I think, than we have before in previous podcasts. We're going to kind of work through how you can utilize it in a variety of contexts, and kind of explore how it influences your relationship, both with yourself and especially yourself. That's the biggest thing. When we talk about radical acceptance, we're talking about utilizing a cognitive skill that helps reduce your own stress and protect your joy and your feelings of comfort, and how that might change your interactions. And then what do you do after you've practiced radical acceptance? What's the next step? And so that's really where we're going today. And we're utilizing brother number one's this experience kind of as the catalyst to get there. This is the vehicle. And so unlike other podcasts where we've like shared the play-by-play with the text messages and the responses, we're really going to just kind of identify the patterns. And so if you compare today's episode with other episodes, you're going to be able to kind of see these patterns that we've identified. And also, I want to make it, clear that we're not trying to bash on brother. I believe that brother number one is doing the best job he knows how to do. And that, a lot like what Brene Brown teaches is that if you believe that people are doing their best, it helps you practice a lot more empathy. So I think that brother number one is responding in the way that he feels is best. And I don't think he's able or willing to see how toxic that is or how much that hurts, how it's not helpful. And I don't think that's his intention, but I don't think he knows how to do it differently.
I think that's been one of my biggest struggles with these conversations is that I don't feel like there's a recognition of what he is doing. And that makes it hard. Now, I'm not without blame either, right? I say things that are inappropriate or whatever, and frankly, doing this via text is probably It's an easy way to keep a record, but it's not a very good way to have a real conversation because you could look back at our text train and they're like this long on there.
Nobody can see how long this long is, but Mason just
they're like 12 inches long sometimes, these texts on my phone. And so there's a lot of information in there, a lot of stuff going on. So it's hard to, I recognize that's the case. I wasn't in a good place to call at the time. And it just ends up being less than ideal.
Right, but let's unpack that a little bit because there almost seems to be this urgency, like when you communicate with your family, there seems to be this urgency of we've got to respond to this immediately. And then they do it by text. And you know, of course, we are both guilty because we've engaged in that as well. But we lose the nonverbal communication. Like your brother cannot see the nonverbal communication skills. He can't see that what he's saying is upsetting. He can't necessarily read into the intention because he's going to read what you've written in his own internal voice, interpreting it as he goes based on the intonations that he assigns to that, and vice versa. You're going to read what he says with the intonations of your head. And while, yes, our brain, does a good job of kind of taking past experiences and putting that in there, our brain also, misinterprets and lies to us and makes it seem better or worse. Like it's a pretty common thing that we are going to misunderstand when it's said in an email or a text message. But also I think it's important to put here that when you've had these types of conversations in person, they haven't really gone any better. Yeah, they haven't really. And maybe we just need to get to explaining what happened in this situation. But before we do that, I also want to, what was it that I was going to say?
I don't know.
I remember now. Sorry, my brain. I was listening to the kids we had to pause there for a minute right at the beginning because our kids had a little spat over some video games. So we had to go do the parenting role there for a second. So I was just listening for another noise out there, but I think that one was laughter, not tears. So we're good to keep going here. So the other thing that I want to say is that when I read your response, Mason, there were absolutely times where I was like, ooh, that probably, I know what you're trying to say again, because I know you and I know your patterns of speech and I know kind of what you're trying to get through because we've talked about it so much in person, but you said things in a way where that didn't come off. And so there's this, I think one of the reasons why we're not necessarily dissecting this line by line is number one, it would take forever. Number two, yes. I don't think it would be helpful or appropriate in this situation, but also this is still ongoing. The conversation has not ended. You've gone silent because of life happening and needing some time before you respond. But this is still an ongoing conversation, which, it has been in the past, but this is a new vein of that. So we really want to dig into patterns here and then talk about what do you do? Because we know, Mason, you're not alone. So go ahead.
Right.
What happened?
Absolutely. The specifics not maybe as important as just the patterns of what is going on. So I had heard, I think actually...
Well, hang on. I'm going to pause you really quick. I'm going to interrupt you. It's really rude.
Oh, it's a good thing I got started then, huh?
Right?
It's hard to interrupt me.
I think my pen is dying here too. I know, that's terrible. So anyway, don't worry, I have a backup. I can scribble out what I've already covered because I've got a backup. Shoot, now I forgot what I was going to say again. I interrupted you.
And you still don't even know what you were going to say?
What were you saying? What did you say?
I was getting ready to start with the story. I said that the specifics of the conversation not probably as important as the patterns.
And that's what I was going to say is I find looking at patterns of behavior, it's that like zoom in, zoom out thing. And so when you zoom out, so you're no longer enmeshed in the specifics of what exactly was said, but rather you zoom out and you identify the patterns, that is vital to being able to move forward and process and stay curious. Like there's a time to zoom in and look at the details and how, you're saying what you're saying or you're hearing what you're hearing or what they're saying when they say those details are, I'm not saying ignore those, but it's very important to zoom out and look for patterns as part of the learning and individual growth process.
Well, I think especially in the context of what we're trying to talk about today and shifting expectations, it's the patterns that are going to be the most helpful. So, yeah. So anyway, I think it was actually you that had told me this, but somebody had told me that Joseph Smith hardly ever quoted from the Book of Mormon in his sermons.
Right. I saw something like that on Mormon Stories or Mormonism
happened,
Live.
yeah.
Somebody had said something along the lines of Joseph Smith doesn't even believe that the Book of Mormon was true. And I shared that with you and I was like, I think we got to dig into this a little bit because like we said in a previous podcast, we've learned in the ex-Mormon space that when you see something like that, it's almost sensationalized and it's like, all right, let me actually go in and look and see where's the accuracy in this, where's this information coming from before jumping to conclusions.
Right, absolutely. And so I decided I was going to just go back and look. And the easiest way for me to do that was to go to several years ago, the church put out for Elders Quorum and Relief Society, Priesthood and Relief Society, they did the teachings of the prophets and they took one prophet and covered their teachings for the year. And so I went to that one for Joseph Smith. His was one of the ones that was big enough that I think they actually took 2 years to cover it. Because there's a lot that comes from Joseph Smith. So I just went through that manual. You'll recognize that is not an extensive search of what Joseph Smith taught. There's lots of books and diaries and all kinds of other things. But that was kind of the church leaders from the 90s and 2000s
Right, that's
compiled all of these things from Joseph Smith.
Right, you're talking recent past prophets compiling what they feel is the most important stuff that Joseph Smith did, said, taught, and putting it in a manual that the adult religion class would focus on for 1 to 2 years.
Yes.
I think you're right. I think it was 2 years, but I can't say for certain.
I don't remember for sure, but I think that was the
case. I think his and Brigham Young's were like the 2-year ones, and everybody else's was a 1 year. So, yeah, I think that was a great, kind of an anthology, let's say, of the works of Joseph Smith. So obviously not extensive, but appropriate.
Not comprehensive.
Oh, comprehensive. I like that word.
But it was a quick way to kind of just look and say, is there anything valid in this? So I went through every chapter in that book, and I just looked at the references that were there.
Dude, what do you do for a living?
I do anesthesia. And once the person is asleep, oftentimes there's time to focus on other things. Not completely. I never get completely focused on something else. But something like this, because I was just kind of scrolling through and looking for the references, and I didn't go to the end of the chapter. I went through what was being taught and just looked for the references.
Right, so you're just kind of scanning while you have some downtime at work. Yes. I was just teasing you.
I know.
You make good money scanning old books.
Yeah. So anyway, as I scan through all these chapters, there are, there's 47 chapters in this book of topics that covered things like God the Father, Jesus as the Redeemer, repentance, baptism, the Holy Ghost, the priesthood, the gifts of the Spirit.
Are you talking about core doctrines?
I'm talking about
Church
core
of
doctrines
Jesus Christ
and
of
some that
Latter-day
aren't.
Saints.
Things like hope and revelation, the plan of salvation, knowledge, apostasy, forgiveness. These are core doctrines, like you said. So I went through all of these, and that's just a smattering of what they were. I didn't write down every topic because some of them weren't so core, but many of them were. My point being, these are core doctrines, and in total, references that came from him, they were part of his sermon that came from the Book of Mormon, there were 6.
Tuesdays at Papa Murphy's, you can get large signature or thin crust pizzas for just $12.
We call it Take and Bake Tuesday.
Talking $12 Take and Bake Tuesday?
Yeah, that's today's topic.
It's terrific for tuning up a tiring Tuesday through a tasty $12 treat.
Truthfully, Take and Bake Tuesday tops tossing back tacos.
Tell that taco to hit the trail. It's Take and Bake Tuesday's time to triumph.
Time out, this is turning into a tongue twister.
Totally tis. So just try Take and Bake for $12 every Tuesday at Papa Murphy's. Change the way you pizza.
So in 47 chapters, you found 6. So
I found 6.
That number might be off because I mean,
I
you
could
were
have missed
scanning
some,
and
sure.
and focusing way more on your patients and
but I
your
didn't
job
go
than the
quickly
book.
either. I went slowly so that I wouldn't miss things.
So you found
but
6.
Absolutely, I'm human, could have missed them. But I found 6. So in 47 chapters, you have 6 references. 2 of those were in one chapter, and then 1 reference in each of 5 other chapters.
Wow.
So then I took that information and I posted it on Facebook.
You know what would be really interesting is if there was any way to go back and do like every single reference in there and do like a percentage of like percentage
Sure.
wise.
I kind of paid attention to that because almost every chapter, and I only say almost because I didn't keep track of it, almost every chapter had references from the Doctrine and Covenants, from the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, Pearl of Great Price. There were references from other things. If you think Joseph Smith's writings, we're talking Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price, both attributed to Joseph Smith. Whether
Right, the
you
history
believe
of the
Revelation
church.
or him writing.
So he
they were
also
there.
wrote the history of the church, the Joseph Smith papers.
Right. So there's
Right.
lots of stuff that he quoted from that is scripture, but the Book of Mormon was conspicuously absent from that.
Right. Well, and I think it's also important to kind of throw this in here for our non-Mormon listeners, and that is Joseph Smith wasn't known to quote from sources that were not the Bible or something that he wrote because he was the creator and founder of this religion. So,
authority.
right, he basically, if he spoke, it was as if he was speaking for God. And so he didn't really, it wasn't like, oh, and I'm quoting this from, so and so and so and so. We know that he pulled a lot from like the Apocrypha and whatnot, but Joseph Smith would not have necessarily responded and said, this is from the Apocrypha. If it wasn't in the King James Version of the Holy Bible, it probably didn't get referenced. It was considered Joseph Smith's own creation, design, and work based on direct revelation and dictation from God.
Right. And one of the important aspects of this, why this mattered to me, is that there's actually a verse in the Doctrine and Covenants where God, quote unquote, God was supposedly condemns the church for not heeding the new and everlasting covenant, even the Book of Mormon. And so there's this guidance, and this is early on. If I remember correctly, the revelation was received in 1832. So early on in the church's history.
Okay, and what year did Joseph Smith pass?
1844. So 12 years before he died. And
So so if he wasn't quoting it enough prior to that date, we have the last 12 years of his life where you would think that there had been some course correction where he would be utilizing it more.
that was the thought process.
That makes sense. I like that.
I make no conjecture into why this is. I don't think even in my post I made any conjecture as to why.
Right, it was this
simply,
is
hey,
interesting. I'm working through it.
What's going on here? I don't know why. And most everybody that posted had positive things to say. I had some people that had questions that were kind of questioning my motivation and stuff.
Right. But I would also like to add that you had people, both your TBM family and friends and your non-TBM, like you had people
Right.
from all areas kind of speculating as to why this might be and why it mattered or did not matter to them. So I felt like for the most part, the commentary on that was really, really healthy.
Yeah, I agree.
From both
I agree
sides.
as well, with the exception possibly of one comment, and that was the brother that we're talking about.
No, I think there was the brother and the cousin.
Oh, yeah, you're right. There was
Brother
a
and cousin, but the cousin was in response to the brother.
Yeah.
So he just, threw
this
gasoline
was the post
on
that
it.
I made. And it was really just to call attention to this. Most of what I've posted, and I think even really most of what you've posted on Facebook about this issue, is to call attention to the fact that there's some
Right.
ickiness here. So I posted that, and my brother responded, and he did not respond to the post.
Right, he didn't respond to the question or
me,
anything.
And he said, essentially, what y'all need to understand about Mason is that he's just trying to tear testimonies down, and he offers nothing in alternative.
Right, he offers nothing to replace it.
Right. So that was the basic thing that he said. It came off, and you guys can judge for yourself. For me, it felt like a character attack. He wasn't addressing the post. He was just attacking he was determining for himself what my motivation was.
Well, and I think it's important to comment that, if we zoom into the detail right here, he wasn't even addressing you. He was addressing everybody except you, because it was what you all need to understand about Mason is. Right. And then he said it. He wasn't saying, hey, Mason, it feels like, or hey, Mason, I'm concerned, because it seems like what you're doing is he didn't talk to you. He talked to everybody else. It was like, you're over here and I'm going to tell everybody what they need to know about you.
So the first pattern
problem
that I want to call attention to that I see here is that, because I've seen this before, is that it feels like he's trying to protect the world from me.
Right.
Not from what I'm saying, but from me. And the reason it feels that way is because he didn't address what I'd said at all in that response. Now,
and he rarely does. That's a pattern, is that he doesn't answer the question. It appears that he responds in a way of, you need to be quiet, and hey, world, you need to ignore this guy.
Right. That's exactly what it feels like. I don't know if that's his intention, but it feels that way.
Yeah, and I appreciate you clarifying that. And I think that, again, one of the challenges with social media is we inadvertently dehumanize. Like, the way that this is coming across is Mason is less than because he disagrees with my opinion, and all of you need to be aware because he's dangerous. Like, it's not something that he probably would have said, say, if there was like a great big conversation. Like, if we say, hey, there's like 12 people at a dinner table and we're all talking, it's not normal for him to have said, hey, y'all know what you need to understand about Mason right now is that he's like, it would be more like an interactive dialogue, and on that social media that gets separated. And again, that there's this pattern of, Mason, you're less than, you need to be quiet because I don't like what you're saying, or what you're saying makes me uncomfortable. There's never been, you're not sharing things that are factual. There's never been a question of your integrity as far as whether or not you're being honest. It's, what is your purpose in sharing all this stuff? Shut up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I explained to him in the text that that's how I felt, that he was just telling me to shut up. And he clarified that that's not what he's trying to do. But he never really changed the way that he did it. And so it's one of those things where you can say that's not what you're doing, but what I'm getting from you is that that's what you're doing. And so that's the first pattern I want to kind of just clue into, that it feels like from high demand religions, in this case Mormonism, if you call attention to a problem, they immediately want to attack you for calling attention to the problem. They don't want to deal with the problem, usually because they don't have a good answer for it.
Right.
And that's one of the patterns, is that you see this in all kinds of things. Like, pay attention to politics, right? You bring up an issue when you're having debates or whatever. They don't want to talk about the issue. They want to talk about how
they want to discredit the person who brought the issue to light. They want to discredit them. They want to character bash them. They want to silence them.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and this is really interesting, because this is, I think, a pattern that has been learned through religion and through politics. Like, this isn't just your brother. This is a pretty common thing. And I want to kind of bring this back to the church, because Bill Reel, I think on his personal site, recently made the transcript for his excommunication public. And I want to get his permission and link that so that our listeners can, click to that, because there was a lot of power in this. And so if I'm summarizing at the very end of this, before he gets excommunicated, Bill Reel in this transcript almost belabored the point, but in a healthy way, I felt, of, do you feel like I have been dishonest? And the leadership, so he would have been high council, so 15 men from his local congregation and area said, no, we don't feel like you've lied. We don't feel like you're misrepresenting anything. You're not, like, even his criticism of the leaders, they said, no, it's what you're saying is factual, but you're not supposed to say it.
Right.
And then they excommunicated him. And so one of the things that Bill Reel talks about in his experience of excommunication is, I am seeking objective truth. And when we talk about objective truth, we're talking about, there's evidence that I can hold in my hand, things that people have written, things that people have said, that we have concrete, tangible evidence, like evidence that would hold up in a court of law because it's physical evidence, right? And that he has not misrepresented any of that in any way. So he is shedding light on a problem that Jesus condemned. And instead of the apostle or the prophet or the church or whoever it is saying, hey, you know what, let me fix this, we are turning the light off and telling him to shut up and go away. So we are punishing those who are practicing integrity to protect those in a position of power.
Yeah.
And like you said, Mason, you see this in politics all the time.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
When I would label something like this, I would say character attacks, right? You're attacking a character in order to not deal with the problem itself. So that's the first one. Did you have anything else you want to say?
Right, because you're deflecting. This is something that a lot of people with like narcissistic tendencies will do as well. It's, I'm going to distract away from the topic or the thing that makes me uncomfortable. So we as human beings, we're not good at sitting with things that make us uncomfortable. So when I'm emotionally, like when my brain is uncomfortable, I experience that in my physiology, tension, nausea, tightness in my stomach, those types of things. We're not very good at sitting with the uncomfortable. We really want to make it like go away immediately. Yes. And so that's another reason why we tend to silence the voice that's shedding light on things, because our neurobiology is like, you shut up. I need to be able to be comfortable. You shut up. You made my wife uncomfortable. Right. So like with this brother, one of the patterns that has occurred, like when he very first responded to me and told us that our marriage was doomed, he was doing so because something I had posted upset his wife. Even though my post wasn't directed towards her in any way, she was frustrated or upset by it. And he came at me as I'm protecting my wife's level of comfort. You shut up. Don't make my wife uncomfortable. You shut up. That makes me uncomfortable. And it takes I think it was Bill Reel who said this, a highly evolved person to push through that and recognize this discomfort is an opportunity for growth. Like instead of shutting it down, I maybe need to soothe myself, take some deep breaths, and proceed with caution to see where it takes me.
Why does that make me so uncomfortable? You have to be able to be curious and ask that question.
As long as you're not in imminent danger. But see, that's where TBMs, so TBM, True Blue Mormon or True Believing Mormon, that's where a lot of your Orthodox believers are really going to struggle, because looking at this, they've been taught is an imminent threat to their eternal happiness and ability to get to heaven, which is why we see this high level reactive response, is because they're responding from that amygdala brain space of needing to be protected. So we talk about, he feels like he's on God's errand. He is shutting you down so that way you don't destroy people's salvation, which is kind of goofy. It's messed up, but when you're inside that system, you've been taught that that's fact.
Yeah. Yeah, the second one, actually, that you just kind of brought up, I don't think it was the second one I was going to talk about, but since you brought it up, so when we started texting, he made some conjecture about why Joseph Smith did that.
So not on the public post, but in your private messages,
post,
he said, hey, maybe Joseph Smith did it for this reason.
Right. Hey, maybe this, maybe that. I think he gave me like 3 possibilities of why this might have happened. And I said, basically, well, why do you get to make conjecture about why this happened, but I don't get to make conjecture about why this happens.
Great question.
I thought so.
Tuesdays at Papa Murphy's, you can get large signature or thin crust pizzas for just $12.
We call it Take and Bake Tuesday.
Talking $12 Take and Bake Tuesday?
That's today's topic.
It's terrific for tuning up a tiring Tuesday through a tasty $12 treat.
Truthfully, Take and Bake Tuesday tops tossing back tacos.
Tell that taco to hit the trail. It's Take and Bake Tuesday's time to triumph.
Time out, this is turning into a tongue twister.
Totally tis. So just try Take and Bake for $12 every Tuesday at Papa Murphy's. Change the way you pizza.
Yeah.
And his answer was basically, well, you know what, let me just read it because I kept
Right,
it here.
just
for
that one.
purpose. He says, I guess the difference is I believe I postulate in the service of God.
So you're only allowed to postulate if you're doing it in the way the Mormons want you to, because anything other than that is considered evil, wicked, and from Satan.
Yes.
So I want to kind of point out that black and white thinking, it's either or, rather than, hey, Mason's postulating this because he's curious and trying to understand it better and maybe wanting to throw it out there to the masses and see if somebody else has an idea that resonates with you. Like, instead of it being, I'm posing this question because this kind of bugs me and I'm working on it, you're no longer on God's errand, therefore you shouldn't have questions. You can only question if your reasoning is circular and comes back to the Mormon church is true.
And frankly, it feels like if you are actually interested in my salvation, address the question.
Right?
Don't attack me as a person. Attack what I'm doing. Address the question.
Right. Well, because you had the one cousin who is an Orthodox believer that said, you know, this doesn't really bother me, but as I think about it, and he gave you 3 or 4 things that I thought were very well thought out. And I mean, obviously the challenge is that this is not a question that you're going to get a tangible, concrete answer.
Right, I can't
It's
get
all
the
postulating.
answer. I can only get postulation. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so, you know,
Conjecture.
when you're trying to fill in the blanks and just kind of figure out, okay, how can I, you know, do the mental gymnastics to either make this work or make this not work for me, I felt like your one cousin gave some good ideas about what was going on. You know, some of those ideas were Joseph Smith was intimately more familiar with the Bible because he had been, you know, his family was very religious and he had studied it from the time he was itty bitty. Whereas if you believe the story of he basically dictated the Book of Mormon, whether he used rock in a hat or a Urim and Thummim, or if the book was even in the room, irrelevant at this point. The idea that he would have literally had one read through of it before it went to publishing, he's nowhere near as familiar. And that would actually be supported by the Doctrine and Covenants scripture where they were chastised for not using the Book of Mormon more. So I think, you know, I think your cousin, you know, displayed some critical thinking and some reasoning of maybe the reason is because he wasn't as familiar. And look, the Lord got mad at him for it. And then the question would then be like, okay, well then what stopped Joseph from fixing it? And of course, then you have human error. You know, I can tell my kids 25 times to do something. Right. But there was an open dialogue. There was curiosity there. There was respect there. And that was very appreciative. So I think that your cousin was able to demonstrate it doesn't matter which side you're on, we can have an open, respectful dialogue.
Absolutely.
And kind of toss our ideas around and be safe.
Absolutely. And I responded in such a way as to say, you know, I really appreciate these thoughts. I also, if I remember correctly, said that doesn't resonate with me for this reason. But I love the thoughts. They're absolutely possible.
Right.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you, no, that's not the reason this happened, because I don't know.
Well, and I think something that's interesting about this cousin is this cousin has spent more time with you than your brother has over the last 25 years. Because you spent that time when you were doing your moonlighting in that area with this cousin and his family.
Right.
So when it comes to what your intentions and who you are as a person, this cousin actually has more data and more experience than your brother did. And that was, I've got to own my part in this, because my response to your brother was neither helpful. It was true, but it was not helpful. But I also didn't care anymore. It was like, oh my gosh, I'd hit my I don't give a damn anymore. And my defense mechanisms had kicked in for, I can say that honestly, I wanted to just shut him up, because I'm like, stop beating up on my husband. Like, I'm so tired of how you're bullying my family. And even our teenage son was like, dude, can you just leave my dad alone? Like, because all of us took his comment to be verbally aggressive and bullying.
Right.
And so, my response was something along the lines of, you don't even know your brother. The only time you've talked to him in the last 25 years was to ask him for money. So like, you don't know what his intent is. And that wasn't nice. And I did not retract that comment. Maybe I need to, but I still don't feel bad about it, which is probably also a sign that I'm still struggling. So I want to make sure that I'm owning for you and I have not communicated with this brother in a 100% healthy manner either.
Yeah, well,
there's a lot of stuff here.
I think that, again, if you come back to what is the title of this, Shifting Expectations, it's recognizing those moments where you have given up on a relationship.
Right. When it comes to your family, I'm burned the fuck out.
Right. If you can recognize, and that's not the case with all of my family, it's the case with a couple
with
of my
the few
family.
members. Yep.
And if you can recognize that that's the case, then maybe you serve yourself better if you just don't engage with that person, especially in places like social media where it can be easily misconstrued. But that's where you as the listener have to recognize where you are so that you can shift expectations, so that you can understand better how you will respond and maybe not respond that way.
Well, I can honestly say I responded from my amygdala, and it wasn't very nice, and I have not yet removed it. I'll think about it. Go ahead, Mason.
That's part of that whole issue. You mentioned lack of accountability. One of the other patterns that I see is that there's usually a shifting of accountability. I'm kind of marry these up together. One of his complaints was, and what he said on this post was, what you need to recognize about Mason is that he's just trying to hurt testimonies and not trying to replace them. Well, many of the comments that came up that were very helpful is, it's not my job to replace
It's not
them.
Mason's job to replace that.
First off, I'm not trying to destroy testimonies, not at all. I want people to be informed.
Right.
I want people to be able to make their own conjecture about this and whether it means something to them or not. Some people said it means something. Some people said it doesn't. Whatever. I want you to be informed of the fact that this exists. And then if your testimony gets affected by that, that's not for me. You wouldn't even want me to replace it. You don't want me to replace your faith with anything that I have.
Right. The expectation that you're responsible for replacing somebody's testimony basically says that these people are not capable of figuring things out on their own.
Right.
That they're dumb. And I don't think that's what your brother's trying to do.
No.
But there seems to be this, and I see this a lot in Mormonism, is who's going to own the accountability? Because it's that spiritual bypassing of, I'm on God's errand, so it doesn't matter who I burn up in the meantime. And as long as I hyper focus on, inside this little bubble, all will be well in the world. We stop critically thinking. And so I think it's terrifying. I mean, I know for you, Mason, as I told you that I was out, you were absolutely terrified with, well, what do you believe now? Like, that was one of the things that you were like drilling into me. And I was like, how do you feel about God and Jesus? What do you think about them? What do you believe now? It was like you couldn't accept the fact that I could say, this doesn't work for me and I have not yet found a replacement. Yeah. I'm working on it. So that's a common misconception, that we are somehow responsible for fixing it because we shed light on it. You didn't break this. You're just acknowledging that something is goofy here.
Yeah, well, and that's what I want to do here is that the pattern seems to be that because I can't replace whatever is working currently for you, quote unquote, working for you, I shouldn't talk about it. Like,
Right.
Why should I take the risk? And I've had more than one family member address this with me this way. Because I can't replace Mormonism with something as good as Mormonism, why am I seeking to destroy Mormonism?
Right.
First off, I'm not, but that's the pattern, is that you're destroying something so good. Well, okay, in some people's eyes it is so good, but the problem is that you can't see that in this person's eyes, this is terrible. This
Right.
is a terrible organization because of the pain that they've caused to her and him and them.
Right. If you're
whatever.
a part of that Orthodox system and you believe it through and through, you're going to have a really hard time identifying with your gay brother and sister why this system is horrifically
or the abused,
toxic.
or the abused child, or the divorced parents who now
the
have to
single
struggle,
mom,
or the
the-
single mom, or the person who cannot seem to beat cigarettes, and so they don't fit into the mold
Right.
of Mormonism. Mormonism tends to be very toxic for those people. Some people healing, some people so toxic, and they want me to shut up about the toxic parts because of the good parts.
Right. It's that toxic positivity. We only want to look at the good. We're going to ignore the bad, and we're not going to pay attention to anything that's in the no-go zone. And unfortunately, the Mormon Church's no-go zone is anything not published by the Mormon Church.
Right. So that's the pattern there, is that they tend to want to shut us up because we don't have a replacement. But that's not my job. I find my own replacement. So will you.
Right. And trusting humanity to be able to do that is important. Now, I'm going to say that if your system is breaking, it's excruciatingly painful. It's hard, but growing is supposed to be difficult. There's supposed to be struggle in growing, like all over nature, childbirth, in our own brains, in our own physical bodies. Like my kids complain of growing pains because their bones are literally stretching.
Right.
Growing is usually painful. We get stronger when we struggle. And so I trust people. I know it's going to be difficult, but I trust them to be able to figure it out. And if they need help, I hope that I'm a person that they can reach out to, and that if they don't have me, they have other resources to do that. It's not my job to replace, but I can absolutely stand by and be empathetic and understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some of the other
So
patterns?
there's one more really that I want to talk about because we've kind of touched on most of them. The last one is the pattern is, so let me just kind of some background here.
Oh, I remember I was going to say something too. It's not just your family that's done this. Like your information doesn't make me feel good. It makes me uncomfortable and it doesn't fit my narrative. Therefore, you need to shut up. I'm seeing that as well in some of my family members and some other people where they'll respond to me, why do you keep bashing the church? And it's on things where I've posted or said something that is like a statement of tangible fact, and they're saying that that's bashing. And my thought is, to respond, well, define bashing. I think one of the things that's a challenge for your brother is he cannot clearly define tearing down or destroying somebody's testimony, because if you go back and say, well, the persecution complex, if you go in and say the truth shall set you free, unless it's about Mormonism, then you need to shut up, sit down, be quiet. There's some problems here, but it's very difficult because again, they've been taught if it's true but makes you uncomfortable, if it's criticism against the leaders, whether or not it's true, hush.
Right.
So again, that goes back to the Bill Reel. We're punishing the truth tellers. Your family is punishing you for shedding light on something that's a little interesting, icky, sticky, weird, out of the norm. But that's healthy. We're supposed to go, A and B don't seem to fit together. There's got to be something else going on here.
What do I do with that? Yeah.
All right, sorry, go ahead for your last one.
So the last one, I'd posted this on Facebook, and then he reached out to me, and he's like, so what do you believe?
Okay, watch. I'm going to challenge you there. You're putting in Mason intonation for brother's statement. It could have been, so what do you believe? We
Sure.
don't know. So just keep an eye on that. So he
Sure.
asks you, so what do you believe?
There was more to the text that kind of influenced that intonation.
All right.
But yes, that's fair. And that's one of the problems with text is that we put
Right.
our own inflection in there. So what do you believe? And I said, why should I tell you? And he said, you're right. I really just want to have kind of a surface level relationship with you. And I said, okay. And that was it. And then he came back and he's like, look, I don't want to fight you on this. I just want to, and he kind of clarified more. I just want to be able to talk about surface level crap with you. And I said, basically, I'm not interested in that kind of relationship. And I followed that up with other stuff about the way that he had attacked my character and so on. And then he engaged. Because I had done
Right.
that.
You probably
engaged,
triggered him.
We went back and forth. But later on, he blames me for engaging in this conversation. And one of the patterns that I see is he gets involved because of something I said. Like it's not that I didn't say anything. He
Right.
gets involved because of something I said, but he blames me for his involvement.
Right. Another form of gaslighting.
And I see this all the time.
And turning the tables.
Yes, it's a shifting of responsibility. Like if you don't want to engage, don't engage. It doesn't matter what I say. If you don't want to engage, don't engage.
Right.
But when you engage, don't blame me for engaging.
Right.
Especially in this case, it was just him and I on this. It's not like this was going out to the world. It was just him and I. He chooses to engage and then he blames me for it. If you don't want to engage, don't engage, but don't blame me for it. And I see this happen all the time. So it's one of the patterns that we're looking for as we shift expectations is just to recognize if he's going to blame me for his engagement,
Right.
I have to take that into consideration. Do I want to stop first? Because I could have said, okay, fine.
And not responded.
And not responded again. But I was being honest with him about what I wanted. And he could have said, okay, that makes sense. That's not what I want. Is it possible for us to just have a surface level conversation?
Or surface level relationship.
A surface level, yes, relationship. And I could have then said, yeah, I guess so. That's fine.
Or no thanks.
Or no, I don't.
Right. Well, and it's difficult to have a surface level relationship with this individual because anytime there's even an inkling of a ripple, he attacks your family. Like it's not just you he's attacked. He's attacked me.
Yes.
He's attacked our kids.
That was actually the reason that I said I wasn't interested in that conversation, because when we have conversations, he attacks the people around me. So I'm not interested in having a surface level conversation with
Right.
you when you have attacked people around me and don't take any
Right. And
accountability for it.
There's also a pattern with this brother where he will ask the question and send it, and then like 2 seconds later you get a never mind, I don't even want to talk about that. And it's like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, do you
Right.
want me? Because now you're in this like lose-lose situation. Do I engage or do I ignore it? Because you said never mind, but if I ignore it, then I'm going to get in trouble for not having responded to the question you told me to ignore.
Right.
So, there's this misplacing blame. Again, it's this tendency to shoot the messenger rather than take a step back, calm your physiology and go, okay, what does this mean? And I get that because again, if you, and I think that I speak for most of those on the outside of their religious trauma. So you've escaped the system that you're in. The people on the inside are not willing or able. And I want to make that distinction. If they're not willing to do it, they just don't want to, or are they not able because of their conditioning? Most of the time, it's somewhere in between. It's that willing, able, enmeshed. You can't fully separate it. But I want you to recognize that the people inside the system cannot see the toxicity from the outside. And as they do, like what my experience is so far, is that as I myself and as most others are learning this troubling history, or these difficult doctrines, or are beginning to recognize toxic patterns of behavior and ways of thinking, and, as they have these life events and whatnot, they cannot question the system because the system isn't giving them food. It's like, nope, just go back to what you've always done and ignore all that stuff. And so they have no other option but to look outside of the system.
Right.
They don't have another option, and that's part of why so many people are leaving those systems. Now, in my opinion, most of the time leaving those systems is reasonable and expected when there's no place to go to safely do mental gymnastics or even be a part of the system with a differing opinion. Like, it's hard to be on the inside edge of Mormonism and have a different opinion because there's no space for that in these high demand religions.
Tuesdays at Papa Murphy's, you can get large signature or thin crust pizzas for just $12.
We call it Take and Bake Tuesday.
Talking $12 Take and Bake Tuesday?
That's today's topic.
It's terrific for tuning up a tiring Tuesday through a tasty $12 treat.
Truthfully, Take and Bake Tuesday tops tossing back tacos.
Tell that taco to hit the trail. It's Take and Bake Tuesday's time to triumph.
Time out, this is turning into a tongue twister.
Totally tis. So just try Take and Bake for $12 every Tuesday at Papa Murphy's. Change the way you pizza.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's the patterns that we want to recognize. It's just recognizing that people tend to continue to behave in a certain way until they have something that triggers them to move into a different point of view. I know that's the case for me. I assume that's the case for most people. It's just that until something causes you to switch direction, you kind of stay, the law of Newton, right? Objects in motion tend to stay in motion unless acted on by another force. And that's kind of where that is.
Right. And I want to clarify, I'm not saying that it is the church or any systems, any organization it's not their responsibility to replace it. But I think it's, wise to be like, hey, we've got a whole lot of people leaving because they're struggling with this. Do we have something new to offer?
Yeah.
And in my experience within Mormonism, the way that they're managing it is further gaslighting and digging in their heels and ignoring the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, when you do that, eventually your organization is going to fail.
Yeah.
Now, with Mormonism, when we talk about failure, financially, they're set for eons and eons and eons. But what their membership and congregations are going to look like in the next 15, 20, 25, 30 years, it's going to be vastly different than the church you or I grew up in, I think.
Yeah.
So
let's move into talking now about what you called radical acceptance and
right.
And how now that we recognize these patterns, what do we do now? How do we accept them in a way that allows us to stay healthy and move forward and either continue or not continue these conversations and relationships?
Right. So I think the first person that talked about radical acceptance using those terms. So I want to make sure that I say that this idea has been around for eons and eons. It comes out of Buddhism, if my history of the term is accurate. But the first person that I'm aware of that coined the term radical acceptance in the psychology clinical field is Marsha Linehan in her DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy approach. I'm DBT trained. It is one of the primary treatment modalities that I use in my clinic. So I'm very familiar with this line of thinking. There is a book that we are putting on the recommended readings on the website at daisygirlcommunications.com. It'll also be linked in the show notes. And the name of that book, if you're interested in learning more about radical acceptance and how you can employ it in your everyday life, I highly recommend the book titled Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach, B-R-A-C-H. Again, that's going to be linked in the show notes. As as is the article. This is a blog post that appeared on Psychology Today. So this is a peer-reviewed article that I am pulling a lot of the information from for the purposes of today, mostly because the way that they word it is very user-friendly. It's not super high clinical. We're not talking in 25 syllable words or anything. This is meant for lay term and us with lowly master's degrees to understand. So the question is, what is radical acceptance? And the way that the author here, so this was written or compiled by, Michelle Maidenberg, who is a PhD and an LCSW. And then this was reviewed by Michelle Quirk. So again, this peer-reviewed article that appeared in Psychology Today, what she says, and I quote, "Radical acceptance is letting go of the need to control, judge, and wish things were different than they are." Go ahead, Mason, you had a comment there.
I was just going to do something along the lines of, ooh, that's profound.
Yeah, it is. So let me read it again. Radical acceptance is letting go of the need to control, judge, and wish things were different than they are. And when I teach radical acceptance to my clients, I really stick with the idea of we're going to accept the things the way they are without judging ourselves. Okay, so without judgment, this is how it is. So when we come back into this, is your brother willing or able to communicate differently? I don't know the answer to that, nor is it my business at this point. As far as radical acceptance is concerned, I need to get to a place where the patterns have been consistent. I've done everything I know how to do. I'm beginning to run out of energy. I'm not seeing any change. I'm not seeing any effort. This is my reality. Now what? Okay, so we're not saying, what a jerk. We're not saying, well, he needs to. We're not psychoanalyzing him and saying, well, this probably comes because of blah, 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 blah. We're just saying, look, we've been at this now for several months or years or decades, whatever the case may be.
Right.
I don't have a whole lot more to give, and I'm not seeing any change. That's my reality. Now what?
Right. And it seems like the most important piece of that is I'm examining a situation only for the context of what am I willing to do with that situation. So I'm not sitting here and saying, excuse me, my brother is such an idiot. I can't believe he would do that. He's just a mess.
Right. Well, you've had those thoughts in the past, but you're not having them now that you've accomplished radical acceptance. The goal is to get out of that judging space to where you are just accepting reality the way that it is.
All I want to do is say, these are the patterns. This is what typically tends to happen when I have a conversation with my brother. Is this something I'm still willing to work on? And if it is, how do I do that? Or is this something I'm willing to work on? You know what? It's not. It's not something I'm willing to work on. So how do I disengage in a way that keeps me healthy?
Absolutely. One of the things I love about this article is their next statement. It's actually their first statement, but I flipped them in the key points area of this link that's in the. So I would highly recommend, if you've got time, follow the link on this Psychology Today thing on today's episode show notes, because it is an excellent article about radical acceptance and whatnot. But their key point is what radical acceptance is not, or what does it not mean. And so again, quoting from this, it says, acceptance doesn't mean resignation that the circumstance goes away or that we feel better about it. That means you don't have to like the reality. It's not like, yay, this is my reality and I'm so happy about it.
My family hates me.
No, and it's not a resignation. This isn't a throwing in the hat. This isn't a, well, there's nothing else I can do about it. This really, you've got to watch that overt and that covert judgment and opinion. This is my reality. Now what? The other thing that they say in this, which I love, is, again, quote, fighting against negative emotions leads to our suffering. And I would say, I'm going to change this statement a little bit to fighting against negative emotions increases our personal suffering. There's nothing that Mason can do to change his brother's opinion. You've tried to have open dialogue. He is where he is. Fighting against the emotion that he's not getting it and constantly to like kick against the pricks for a statement from the Doctrine and Covenants, but like force yourself into this negative space over and over and over again really just creates more suffering.
Yeah, well, and I just want to clarify too that in this case, because I'm sure it isn't always this way, but in this case, I'm not trying to change his opinion at all, actually, but I am trying to change the way that he expresses himself, the way that he converses. And I can't do that either. Right.
I would say that from what I know of you, your goal in having these conversations with any of your family members has been to improve communication and identifying how, the way that they are communicating about it is shutting down connection and harming the relationship. It's not that he has a different opinion. It's that the way he's communicating that opinion is really harmful.
Yeah, in point of interest here, I have a sister who has explained to both of us that she's not really in a place where she wants to listen to the podcast or talk about church stuff. She's just trying to hold on to what she has. We haven't talked about that at all. Like, I'm completely in respect of that because I want her to be in a happy place. But she was very respectful about the way that we discussed it. She's like, look, you guys do what you want to do. I'm not really interested in following that right now. Cool.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. And I actually had a very good conversation with that sister. She called me and asked for some help for that. She's like, hey, can you help me understand how this works from a psychological perspective? Right. She and I talked about it, whatever. I'm also honoring those boundaries and she's honoring and respecting us. It's not like you need to shut up. It's just, I'm not in a place where I can listen to that, but I still want to foster and nurture healthy relationships and healthy communication. Right, absolutely. And that's been, it can be done.
That's part of that radical acceptance of I accept that that's where you guys are. We accept that is where you are right now, and we're not trying to change that.
Right, well, and the other thing is she has come to us and said, when my life calms down, I may ask more. Like, it hasn't been a shutting down. It's been, I'm not in a place today.
I don't have the energy today.
Right. But if that changes, I'll let you know.
Right.
And yeah, so we're good there. So one of the things that occurs when we're struggling with accepting the reality is that, and the question that is posed here, again, I'm going to be quoting this article, is the question is whether we're laying on the pain and further intensifying and exacerbating what already exists. And I think that that is one of the things that we see a lot in these toxic communications when we're, leaving religion and trying to navigate these tricky relationships, is that when we judge it, when we try and fix it, and it's outside our ability to control, we're really exacerbating everybody's suffering. I am 100% in favor of working through, dealing with, engaging with negative emotions. That is super healthy.
Right.
But you've got to be able to have balance in that and recognize when you've crossed into a place where it's no longer healthy and productive.
Right.
And for me, with your family, like I said earlier, I was not super great in my response, but my give a damn broke. Now, that doesn't give me the right to be witchy or an ass to your family. That is also inappropriate. But I think that level, when you get to the place where I am, where it's like, look, I'm just going to take a low blow just because I'm so done with this. Hey, that's probably a good indicator that there needs to be some shifting, because I also believe strongly in do no harm. And my comment to your brother was very cruel. It was straight up mean. And he took offense to it, and understandably so. That was, in that moment, that was my intent. and he's already seen it, so I can't take those words back there, which is probably why I haven't deleted the comment, because I want him to have the ability to say, Sarah said this horrible thing to me. And at some point I will own that it was horrible to him, but I feel like deleting it is kind of, now that he's seen it, I think that's kind of sneaky. If I'd been able to take it back before he saw it, maybe, but I think leaving it there so that there's evidence that I'm not perfect and I'm not deleting my imperfections is also very important to me.
Yeah.
So anyway, one of the things is that once you're able to have this radical acceptance where you accept the reality for what it is, the next step is, how does my acceptance shift my perspective or my behavior? And this is really where we dig into what the title of today's podcast is about, shifting our expectations. And that is, Mason, when you engage with your brother in the future, you probably need to honor the request to keep things superficial and disengage. Like, that would be my advice to you as a wife.
Right.
But as a clinician, I would say, now that you understand that this is how things are and you've identified the reality, there's no judgment, and you want to shift your boundaries so that way you can either continue to have a relationship or disengage completely from it, whatever's best for you, what's next? And this is where I start to work with my clients on accepting what the person can give without expecting better. Because this person or this organization, like we talk about your brother, how does this play out in your marriages or with your children or with your employment or in politics or in this great big religious system? You know, one of the challenges I hear a lot from people leaving the church is, well, I want to change it from the inside, which I think is a noble cause. But at some point, the person trying to change it from the inside is going to get tired, because the reality is there really hasn't been that much change in addressing the toxic things of the church. There may have been policy changes, but there really hasn't been that accountability and that apology, which is really what the people need is, hey, can we acknowledge the mistakes of the past, own them, apologize, heal from them, and move forward? So as you get burned out, there's going to be I've done everything, I've had my voice heard, I don't have any more energy, and I don't feel like this is healthy for me anymore. Pass the torch. Because what you're doing is you are shifting your expectations that the organization will change in part because of you, and saying, I'm putting this down. I cannot exacerbate this anymore. Now what? And so as we work on this radical acceptance, we are also learning how to shift our expectations to match what the reality is without judgment. I would say you can still have hope that maybe something will happen, and if something changes, maybe you could re-engage. That's kind of like where I'm at with my family, is if something changes, maybe I would. There would be a lot of caution tape around it, because I hit that point where continuing to try and have a relationship harmed me and everybody else in my immediate family. So you, Mason, and our children. And
and that's going to come with a mindful separation, right? It wasn't just one day you're like, I'm out. It was this happened over the course of years, and you finally got to the point where you mindfully went through, can I make this better? Can I survive this any longer? And the answer was, no, I don't feel like I can, so I'm out. Right. So consequently, it would take a huge change for you to re-engage, and that's part of that whole mindful process. We're not just in and out. It's we've made some tough decisions along the way, and it would take a big change to.
And this is where you get that cliche statement like death by 1,000 paper cuts, in the sense of, and I'll speak about my father and stuff, is that I got to a place where I got to the radical acceptance place over a decade, probably, before I got to discontinuing conversation. And it was because, you know what, I can go and I'm strong enough and my body is strong enough that I can handle the 5 or 6 paper cuts that I'm going to get while I'm there. I'm going to kind of protect myself to minimize the impact of those. I'm going to have antibiotic ointment or Band-Aids or, whatever the analogy is.
Until he cut one of the children.
Until that shifted to my kids, I kept trying. And so as soon as I recognized the harm is no longer worth the effort, we talk about that risk to benefit ratio, I had to shift. And so I had to learn they are unwilling or unable or both to engage differently. I accept that. My expectation is they're going to continue to do what they've always done. Now what? And what you do after that, once you get to a place where your expectations now meet the reality of what is going on, you redefine your boundaries. Like your brother has posed, I only want a superficial relationship with you. I think it's noble that he wants to have a relationship with you at all, especially since I feel like he's verbalized quite clearly that he doesn't want to have any kind of a relationship with me, which is kind of weird. But not weird that he doesn't want to have a relationship with me, but keeping a relationship with you while continuing to bash your wife, not super helpful. But he has said, I don't want us to stop talking. I just don't want to talk about this. And so once you understand those expectational shifts, once you've hit that radical acceptance place, you now have the ability to be more curious and creative in finding ways that you might be able to engage that are less hurtful and definitely reducing harm and anguish.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that I really have anything to say to that. I'm just thinking that.
Did I render you speechless?
No.
Just thinking.
Well, as you were going through that, I was just thinking, I was formulating responses in my head to my brother because the last text that he sent, I haven't responded to at all.
Have you even read it all the way? I mean, have you finally read it all the way?
I haven't read it all the way either.
Yeah, you got just the first 2 lines and then you were like, I'm done.
I read a little bit more of it today when I was preparing for this, but I didn't finish it. But I can look back. This is where the self-reflection falls into. I can look back at these texts and realize that I didn't accomplish what I was trying to accomplish either.
Right.
And
you contributed to some of the mess.
Absolutely. I contributed to some of the mess. I wanted another effort to try and alter the way that he sees how he responds to me. And I don't know that I was wrong in that, but I certainly didn't accomplish what I was trying to accomplish. And I have been unwilling to engage since then. But talking about what you just talked about just brought to mind that I could engage again and say something along the lines of, you know what, I'm sorry. It seems like you were right at the beginning that we're not able to talk about these things. And I do still want to have a relationship with you, so maybe we do just need to go to a surface level conversation. I didn't see that in the beginning. I was hopeful we could do more than that. It appears like we can't. And maybe even set a couple standards like I'm willing to do that as long as you don't bash my wife or that kind of a thing. Or maybe not even do that and just address it when it comes later or something. But
you and I can talk about that off the air.
Right. Well, and it didn't really occur to me that I could still backtrack and say this didn't work the way I wanted it to. I'm willing to just back up and just have that surface level conversation.
Well, and I think that one of the challenges is that it's normal human nature to want to have a conversation to win, like to be right and wrong, righteous, evil, like that black and white, win, lose. In fact, one of the comments from a member of the ward where you were bishop in got really toxic on that same thread. And at the end, you were like, look, I'm done talking. He's like, that's because I win. Right. And you're like, what the flip?
Yeah.
I said flip instead of the other word. No bleep needed.
Good for you. See, growth even for you.
Fuck that. Okay, so anyway, but I think part of radical acceptance is also accepting where you have, like taking that accountability and recognizing, hey, these are my limitations. Do I need to shift my expectations for myself and redefine and realign my own boundaries because what I'm expecting of me isn't healthy either. And I think that self-reflective radical acceptance and expectation shifting is a whole lot harder than it is for other people. Like, it's a lot easier to be like, oh, they can't do any better, I'm over it, and moving on. Although that's disengaged radical acceptance-ish. That's not what we're going for. We're going for a mindful acceptance of the reality without judgment. But accepting the shortcomings in ourselves and learning how to shift expectations for what we can do or what we are willing to do. Because one of the things that I see in you, Mason, is that when you get these types of things, it consumes you. Like, you spend hours trying to respond and word it just right, and it doesn't seem to matter how you word it. It's a bomb waiting to go off. It's just trauma-inducing. And I'm going to say trauma-inducing for both of you, for you and for your brother. And I know it triggers the crap out of me because it makes you grumpy, understandably so. And then our kids begin to get affected by that. That's like that layering on, as the author of this, as let me find her name again. Dr. Maidenberg says in here, the question is whether we're layering on the pain and further intensifying and exacerbating what already exists. And so you've got to be able to identify when your expectations are not going to be able to be met, and that by continuing to push against that, to continue to push into that, is actually going to increase harm, increase trauma, increase stress without healthy resolution. So engage in those negative emotions when you're finding that the outcome is productive. If you find that you can't do that, if you find, oh, it doesn't matter what the negative emotion is, it's never productive, so I'm going to disengage, get professional help. But in yourself, engage in the negative emotions where there's productivity and the outcome is shifting. I'm not saying the outcome is what you want, but that you're seeing consistent improvement and less harm, then you're on the right track.
Right.
And when you've given what you can, you also have to have the emotional maturity, or strive for the emotional maturity to recognize when it's time to accept the things you cannot change without judgment, shift, and realign your boundaries.
Yeah, that can be hard.
Yes, it can. Mason, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we end today?
Thank you for sitting and listening to just, me work through some of the struggle here. Thanks for being with us as we talk about patterns of essentially unhealthy communication. And I hope that it's helpful for you. I feel like whenever we really get into this kind of stuff, I get to be the bad example of what's going on. But I'm also grateful for that. I have not really been able to take the time to really examine my part on this text strain with my brother. And this conversation has kind of brought out some of the places where I really wasn't as healthy as I thought I was being. And I have a tendency to do that. I don't know if I'm alone in that, probably not, but I have a tendency to give, on these text strains, I have the tendency to give myself the benefit of the doubt and not give him the benefit of the doubt. And I think that can be really toxic. And so that's helpful, and I hope it was helpful for you guys as well. I hope that something in your lives that has come up has been a struggle for you, that this might be helpful in that. And because really that's what we're about, is just trying to take this trauma that we've received from, specifically from religious situations, but even others,
Right. This is not a
and deal
religious
with them.
problem. This is a
Right.
human issue.
Right. And so hopefully you see situations in your life where this has kind of been an issue and learn from that.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Thank you for being
Well,
here
and-
with us for that.
Yeah, and keep in mind, recognition is in fact the first step to addressing the issue and having a different outcome. So thank you for being with
Say
us
that
today.
all the time at work, except it's just recognition. Recognition is the first step to recovery.
That's what you say?
That's what I say all the time.
I'm going to change that and say recognition is also the first step to growth.
You
Oftentimes.
can't change what I say.
Yes, I can. We've been married for a really long time. I can alter all day long.
Not at work.
Not at work because I'm not there to correct you. But every time I go to the hospital and talk to them, they like come into me. They're like, "Oh my gosh, he never stops singing." And I'm like, "I know." Kick him in the shins. It works really good. And so far, none of them have taken me up on that.
No,
So
none of them are bringing
rude. No, you work with really good people. So thank you, y'all, for listening. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, have a good one.
Today's episode was hosted by Sarah and Mason Westbrook, produced by Daisy Girl Communications and Alex Vidalis. We would love to see you on our Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma Facebook page. Yeah, it is. So let me read it again. Radical acceptance is letting go of the need to control, judge, and wish things were different than they are.